how to make a yeast starter, fermentationriot.com. Alright, the first step is getting your supplies together. The first thing you will need is a jug, milk carton, glass carboy would be preferred, a scale, and that'll be for weighing your malt extract, your yeast nutrient, more nutrients for your yeast to ensure reproduction and growth, and your cleanser and sanitizer. There your yeast, dry malt extract, and a pot and thermometer more for boiling your mini batch wort. So the first step is cleansing your jug that you will be using for your yeast starter. Here I have my glass small jug, and I prefer glass for the fact that you can see through it. You can see the yeast settle at the bottom, you can see the activity. It's just a lot easier to work with than, say, for instance, a plastic milk carton, which you can't see through. So here I'm adding PBW. It's a cleanser. The cleanser is used to remove any organic residue that might be on the surfaces, any bile growths, anything that could potentially contaminate your yeast and lead to problems in your beer. So that's the first step. You want to add hot water. Hot will make it a little more active, and it would help to add water to the top of the jug. For time's sake, I only partially filled, which is fine. We can stir that up. Now here I'm adding water to our pot. This is determined by the yeast pitching rate calculator, where you enter your gravities, your volume of fermented wort, hit calculate with all your parameters. It will give you your starter size and your malt extract to add. Check that out. I've got a link to it later, so you can always go back. So continue filling your pot based on your yeast pitching rate calculator and the starter size recommended, and then carry that to your stove and go ahead and heat that up. You're going to want this heated to about 180 degrees or hotter, more for sanitizing and sterilizing your malt extract and water that's being used. So the next step is weighing out the malt extract. And again, this is from the yeast pitching rate calculator. And all of these grams are predetermined. So ensure the units you're using on your scale match the grams that are recommended in the pitching rate calculator. And again, that's at the very bottom, malt extract to add. If you're using liquid malt extract, it'll be fairly close to that. There'll be a little more water weight in that, so you could factor in just a little bit more. But I prefer the dry malt extract just for storage purposes. I can keep that in a bag and it'll last as long as I want. And it always helps to have that on hand. Now the malt extract you use, you want to be sure that the beer style you're making, if you're making a dark stout or a porter, you'd want to use a darker malt extract versus a lighter, just to get the yeast prepped for what it's going to see in your beer. And the other benefit of that is not all of the wort from your yeast starter gets separated from your yeast, so some of that will be added. If you're doing a light beer and you're using a dark starter malt extract, that's going to change the color. So you want to try to match those colors up. It'll help in the end. So the malt extract I've added to the pot, and now is stirring, ensuring that the bottom of the pan's not going to burn or scorch that. Just help for cleaning purposes later. So you want to leave that, let it heat up to at least 180 degrees, and let it sit there for 5 minutes. Now during this period, it helps to come back to your glass jug and make sure that cleanser has been actively cleaning the surfaces. And the other part when using PBW, this requires a rinse. So check the cleanser you're using and be sure that it says no rinse or rinse. For the ones that do require a rinse, be sure to rinse with hot water, again at the same temperature or hotter than what you've cleaned with, and be sure to rinse thoroughly. I like to do at least a triple rinse, shaking in between each. And you can't overdo cleansing, sanitizing. In the end, this will really dictate how your beer will taste. Any wild yeast or bacteria quickly make a poor batch of beer, so there's no point in doing all the work if you're not going to do the cleansing and sanitizing part. So now what I'm adding is 5-star san. This is a sanitizer. So now this will sanitize. You could almost call it sterilizing, but it's not quite getting to that point. It's removing the majority of any organisms that would still be alive, any wild yeast, bacteria that could still potentially contaminate the bath, and try to reduce this to a low enough level that it'll just be undetected. So in theory, it should pretty well sterilize the jug for me. Now, Star San has a problem with foaming, so I try not to shake this as vigorous as I would with the PBW. The problem is if you get it to the point where it's all foam, it won't drain out, and you'll have a lot of that left in there, which could potentially hurt the yeast. So I like to keep it mellow at this point, but still coat the surfaces then with the sanitizer. So the next step, I'm grabbing ice to make an ice bath in my sink. I'll make sure I close, add in cold water. And at this point, my yeast starter wort has already been to 180 degrees, and I've held that there for 5 minutes. You can't forget about the yeast nutrient, which I am now adding. You can find that at your local home brewing store. So now your ice will need to be added to your bath. We just want to make a nice cold ice water bath, one where we can fit the pot in. You don't want it too full to the point where it's going to overflow and contaminate your yeast starter wort, but you want enough inside your bath. Now, some people ask why you go through the hassle in making a yeast starter, and these kind of are the reasons that I go through it. One, you want to make sure your yeast is healthy at the point you start, and you don't want to shock it at that point. So my yeast starter, I'm basically getting it prepped for the temperatures it's going to be fermenting at. The other reason is to build up the yeast quantity to the proper amount, and that's determined on the yeast pitching rate calculator. You want enough cells in your batch so that you're not getting off flavors due to low yeast quantities. So make sure you get your quantities up, make sure the yeast are healthy, and I can almost guarantee your beer will come out much better than it would if it was underpitched. So that's why I do it. Now I'm adding the pot to the ice bath, and you want to keep your stirrer and your thermometer in the pot, more so you can stir the bath as it sits there. It'll help cool it a little faster, get more of that wort to make contact with the outside of the pot, cooling it. So this will usually take at least 15 minutes. You want to be sure you get this below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. If you can get it a little lower, I'd even go to 70. You don't want to shock your yeast that have probably been stored in a fridge for a while. The colder, the better. So then after about 15 minutes, and you're confident you're cool, you'll pull the pot out. I like to pull off any drips from the bottom, as that can easily transfer back into your jug. Try to keep it as dry as I can. So here you'll pour out your sanitizer solution. attempt to get most of the foam out. A little bit left in there won't hurt anything. Now the tricky part in pouring in your yeast starter wort into your glass jug. If you can manage to get about 75% of it in there, you're doing pretty good. And then from here, you're going to want your yeast vial, assuming if you got a White Labs. If it's a Yeast, it might be a pouch. But you're going to want to add that to your jug. And at this point, just as kind of an extra precautionary measure, I'll take my spray bottle that I've already filled with Star San and just coat the outside lid, just because that wasn't sanitized previously. And then I'll put the lid on and stir. And at this point, you want to stir it to the point where you're aerating the wort. So you're getting oxygen into the wort. Any air that was left in your jug, you're trying to solubilize the oxygen, because that yeast needs to pull that in so they can reproduce faster. And that's it. There's your starter. Store that somewhere warm, 75, 80, if you can get it there. And it'll be ready to go in 24 hours to 48 hours. Cheers.